listening to all the things going on with Ukraine, and the challenges with the war and some of the atrocities going on. It really is a shame.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and clearly our best wishes and our go to the people in Ukraine, and man, we just wish the best for them and hope that things work out. However, it got me thinking a little bit of some of the consequences, economic consequences for businesses, clearly in the US, but also globally, and some of the impact that it may have going forward, not just, war and the expense and oil, but I know in the past, at least, and not too recent past, of course, Ukraine was one of those markets that had a lot of software engineers and IT talents, and big companies actually were outsourcing a lot of these activities to groups, people, or companies out there, American companies, and all of that has been disrupted. While it doesn't happen to be a product supply chain issue, it is a service supply chain issue, because of course they're having to figure out a way to continue. Obviously, locally the people retain their jobs with all this disruption, but also businesses having to reassess where to reallocate some of those activities. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, I'm with you on it. I think it's a terrible travesty what we're seeing happen there in Ukraine. I mean, some of the footage that you've seen of Mariupol, for example. I mean, beautiful city, just pretty much is destroyed. It looks like it's post-apocalyptic at this point, and it's hard to even move your brain from that to the other. But one of the things that I think naturally happens for folks in business, or at least people like us who talk about it, is we begin to think of a little bit about the not just the human cost, but the cost more broadly on other countries, relationships, their economies, and so on and so forth. And and certainly my brain's gone there as well. Just to comment on one of the things that you said, I think you're right. I think one of the things that is true about, well, Eastern Europe in general, is that certainly in the last 10, 15, 20 years, we've seen, I think, an increase in the number of programmers, for example, that come out of that region. I want to say Romania is the one that has the highest number of, let's say, software engineers, but still, very many in Ukraine as well. And we know that is a talent base for them. But when I think about it, my sense is that while in-flight projects and work that engineers from Ukraine, or for that matter, Russia, if you think about it, might have been working on as a consequence of, the hostilities, the war, they're going to be put on hold. And so I began thinking a little bit about what companies who were reliant on that talent will do, right? And as well as I do, right? They'll try to see if there's a way to get them back on. If some of them have moved on to other countries like Poland, what have you, they might be able to continue to work. But most companies will have contingency, right? And they'll figure out that very quickly, I got to get engineers somewhere else because I got to get this project done. And that's sad on the one hand, right? But on the other hand, that's the nature of business. It's about moving it forward a lot of the time. So my suspicion is that those very same companies will basically try to pick up engineers from some of the places where they grow the most of them, right? India, for example, or China. So that's one thought about it. You also made the comment about other things that Ukraine is known for. Of course, that country, and more specifically Russia, I'd say that kind of those Eastern European countries, they produce a lot of grain, right? I think something like 10% of Russia's GDP, if you will, comes from commodities, right, that they produce. It's things like wheat, corn, nickel, palladium, neon, things that other countries and manufacturers around the world utilize for various things. And so, one of the immediate consequences that I see is that those prices will go up, right? We may not see an immediate impact, but we just had a conversation not so long ago about the inflation rate, being 7.9%. The projected increases there. That was really not even counting what was happening with the sanctions in Russia. Suddenly, you remove a bunch of commodities that you would have gotten from Russia or from Ukraine or from other countries that kind of border those two countries, and now suddenly companies are having to source commodities somewhere else, and we know that has two kinds of impacts. One of them is around obviously the cost of those commodities, and then the consequential cost that consumers wind up paying for finished goods, and we also know that it has impacts on shipping. We were already experiencing problems as a consequence of the pandemic on our supply chain. Now suddenly, with the sanctions that are going on, we're gonna find suddenly that countries are looking very, very carefully to make sure that Russian products are not being transshipped, right? And that they're not inadvertently doing business with Russia for fear of the consequences that will come from that. So, slowdowns in supply chain, I can still see continuing. I can still see increases in commodity pricing. I can still see impacts from an inflation perspective. I mean, that's the sense that I'm getting.
No, and I agree with that, all the statements. And as you were mentioning that, I actually was looking or considering something a little more holistic. I mean, right now we don't see a big issue other than, okay, inflation is a little high. Maybe the pandemic, sure, the current situation with Ukraine is contributing to it as well. So that continues to affect supply chain. Clearly, oil prices are up. But other than that, we're not looking too bad as an economy. There is a thought out there, though, that some of the fallout from this Russian invasion of Ukraine will trigger some stagflation, right? Which is a situation, when you have still some inflation or a slow economic growth, also with rising prices, typically that has high unemployment, and it's a little puzzling for us because the unemployment for us has been, knock on wood, so far so good, right? Maybe it's a generational issue where a lot of people are retiring and there's a lot of jobs out there, but ending up in a world wide as stagflation or stagflationary situation can be a possibility as global growth will slow down, and some of the prices will go up. It's something, I guess, as a business we should consider, and whether big or small, and look at your supply chains and look at your financial situation or health, and it's something to be considered.
Part of the thing which I think is a little bit different this time around, to your point, we've got this really, really low unemployment rate. I think I read today that it's the lowest since 1969. Okay. You and I were quite young in 1969, number one. Number two, one of the things that I also read is that the value of the dollar, quite surprisingly, has suddenly increased. I forget the actual percentage. Don't quote me. I want to say something like 30%. But the point about it is that when you have a high value dollar, which is basically becoming, I mean, it's always been the kind of, currency of choice, if you will. But if you've got people, especially, currency investors that are moving out of rubles, or they're moving out of, euros, because, the Eurozone is being impacted more significantly with the war than, say, we are, then they're going to push their investments into US dollars, which is going to raise the value of the US dollar. That's number one. Number two, and this is an unfortunate reality, right? But what's the other thing that happens during conflicts like this? Well, suddenly everybody is looking for war machinery, or they're looking for the things that support the movement of people from one location to another. And who manufactures that stuff better than just about everybody else? I hate to say it, but the U.S., right? And so, I think a little bit about it. It doesn't bring me joy by any stretch of the imagination. But my suspicion is that we actually may do better as a country, and then the businesses within our country may do better, even though if you think about some of the sanctions, large companies, particularly fast food restaurants like McDonald's and Pizza Hut and those companies, Starbucks, those companies that in the early days of the conflict decided that they were going to stop trading in Russia. They're going to see a dip in their profitability. But when you balance it all out, I think other industries within the United States, and not to mention the U.S. dollar itself and our economy, is likely to do better, whether that's something that people want to hear or not.
Yeah, I mean, those are valid points, and you're right. I mean, the last time that I know of severe stagflation was in the early 70s. I think was we had a gas shortage,
right?
And we suffer all of those, I guess, consequences of low unemployment. And goodness, I remember in the early 80s, mid 80s. A mortgage at 10% was good. It was a good rate, because they were like 12 or 13. So, I mean, I agree with you. When it comes to the dollar, and is the dollar going to get stronger? Is it going to be weaponized against because, maybe some people don't want to have that. We're living in such interesting times and unprecedented situations with new technologies. The world has gotten a lot smaller. Ultimately, some of the history repeats itself, but at the same time, we're seeing some of the trends that go against what history says. And it is, I guess, if you're a business, if you're an individual that likes business, keep a close eye on the situation and don't overexpose yourself, because the biggest flaw is when you're too leveraged and then you can't react, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about it that, there are factors in place now, right, that didn't exist, almost 50 years ago, right? It's a much more global economy, number one. Number two, where we get our energy from has changed dramatically. I mean, those were the days, if you will, where, nearly every drop of oil that we got was coming out of the Middle East, right? Some people will argue with this. I think Biden went on television not so long ago and said, the U.S. is a net exporter of oil these days. So even with the 700, million barrels or whatever the volume was that we were purchasing from Russia, it's easily made up now by, either our own production or, reaching into Venezuela and shaking Maduro's hand in order to get
that could be a podcast in itself.
That's right. That already been made up. But the point I'm trying to make is the circumstances are just different now, right? And the things that might have buried us in the past or made it especially difficult from an economic standpoint for us. I think globalization on the one hand has negative implications for us, but with respect to something like this, it may actually have positive implications for us. I mean, that's my take.
No, I think valid points, and let's not forget that obviously there is an uptake on EVs, right? Electric vehicles. So that's something that was not around in the 70s. I mean, either you had gas in your vehicle, you didn't.
Right.
But hey, look, this is our thoughts and current events right now. Some of the situations going on. Give us your thoughts. Tell us what you think. Are we close to the trends that you observe? Are we completely off? Give us a like, give us a comment, subscribe, let us know. But until next time, Carlos, what do we do?
Be good.
And do good. Take care.